Thank you all for being here for this first item in the Agri-Food 2 block on the common approaches to food safety. Let me start by briefly introducing my colleagues here. To my immediate left, Tammy Svituka from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Next to her, Dr. Julie Callahan from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and next to her, Seema Hashemi. Hey, I got that right. Well, at least you nodded politely, whether or not I got it right. Also from USFDA. And so I'm going to turn it over to the ladies for the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Paul. We'll quickly go through the presentation, and then we'll open up the floor for questions and or comments. So I'll provide a quick reminder, an overview of the initiatives for those of you who haven't read the action plan in some time. Our original objective was to strengthen the good existing bilateral relationship and regulatory alignment mechanisms that we currently have with between the CFIA and US FDA, and to also enhance information exchange between ourselves during the development of regulations. And we underscored that the performance of our systems, the systems recognition assessments that were the what of this action plan within the mandates of both the CFIA and the US FDA would result in improved public health outcomes both in Canada and the US. And we also felt that as a result of our increased international collaboration, we will have better strategic management of our food safety resources. Also, it was underscored that we would attempt to reduce unnecessary duplication in our regulatory activities, and specifically, we do hope that the outcome will reduce the need for routine food safety surveillance inspections by the FDA in Canada and by Canadian authorities in the US. Where it makes sense to do so, we will also attempt to seek alignment of our regulatory systems. And all of this will be underscored through a commitment to share critical information on our joint food safety priorities. We had two specific action items, the first being a systems recognition assessment of the Canadian and US food safety systems within our respective mandates. And we're very pleased to say that we've achieved good progress on these systems recognition assessments. The review of the Canadian food safety systems is currently underway. We actually have a U.S. team up in Canada visiting two parts of the country and visiting facilities. And then the review of the U.S. food safety system will be conducted by FDA officials at the beginning of July.
CFIA.
Sorry, CFIA, my apologies. The second action item related to what we felt was a step towards the development of a permanent alignment mechanism, and that would be the enhancement of a joint committee on food safety that had currently been on the books. We had formed this group many years ago, and we felt that we would develop an arrangement that would focus on more long-lasting regulatory cooperation on common food safety priorities. And in this regard, we have completed a draft arrangement, and we are looking at ways to enhance this issue of information exchange between CFIA and FDA. And we feel that building on our already excellent relationship, that this will collectively strengthen food safety in both countries. In terms of the next 3 months for ongoing alignment work, Many of you have already heard a few times today that we are looking to find more deeper and more strengthened cooperation. And we recognize that there will always be a need to work on specific irritants. And we hope that through this work it will develop a very solid foundation to develop a more systemic approach that prevents having to manage many of these irritants and issues in the first place. And of course, as many of you have been hearing, I don't need to underscore the importance of stakeholder input into this. And helping us identify the issues that are of concern to you will help us form a solid path forward. In terms of next steps and key issues, of course, the completion of our respective assessments is our first priority, and as I mentioned, we do anticipate that the actual field work will be completed this summer. And then, dependent on the outcomes of our assessments, Canada and the U.S. will plan a systems recognition arrangement. So we will convene and start discussions around a formal arrangement. And at that time, we will then use our alignment process, our alignment mechanism, to seek concurrence of that, and hopefully we'll be able to complete that this summer. So I think I'll stop there and allow for questions or comments.
And before turning to all of you for questions and comments, I would like to give Julie an opportunity. I recognize Tammy did the presentation, but just for introductory remarks.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks to Tammy for a great presentation. This was just to provide sort of an overview of the work that we've been doing. And as many of you know who may have been at our public meeting actually 2 years ago now, the systems recognition approach is something new to FDA, and we were very happy to have our second pilot with Canada. And so far it's been very successful, and we've completed the initial stages of the review. And as Tammy said, we have a team in Canada now, and look forward to welcoming the Canadian team to the U.S. in July. So happy to entertain any questions.
So with that, let me turn to you in terms of any questions and comments you might have. I see a hand, Rory.
Thanks very much. I guess I'd be interested to know, once you get to that systems recognition, what does it mean in practical terms, and you know, in terms of how you approve products, food safety interventions, test methods, like you know, to make it practical. Let's say we deal in the meat industry with different approvals for antimicrobial ingredients to achieve food safety in the two countries. So once you've got a systems equivalence, are we saying that if the U.S. system approved and validated and allows for an antimicrobial for use in the U.S. meat industry, that will then also be deemed acceptable? Or a test method, or laboratory results? Like, I'm trying to understand what it means in practical terms once you achieve that goal of overall systems equivalence.
Well, sadly, in practical terms, it will mean nothing for meat because FDA doesn't regulate meat. That would be an FSIS issue. In practical terms for FDA, it actually has many benefits for our agency, and we foresee many benefits for CFIA as well, in that we will be able to rely on the work done by CFIA and not duplicate efforts. So everything from facility inspections to border activities will be really relying on a lot of the work that CFIA already does, and be able to show why we are comfortable with using CFIA's work and not repeating and duplicating their efforts.
And if I could add, Rory, just to make sure, as Tammy said in the presentation, it's important to recognize that the scope of the arrangement will ultimately be around the things that are in each of our mandates. So, for example, the approvals that you pointed to, food additive approvals, would not be within the scope of the mandate because that rests with Health Canada in the Canadian context. It does rest with FDA in the US context, but it rests with Health Canada in the Canadian context. So we're really talking about the inspection oversight in terms of the systems recognition as opposed to end-to-end elements in food safety. So because they are elements in terms of food safety policy, standard setting, pre-market approvals that rest with our colleagues at Health Canada, which would not be covered within the scope of the systems recognition between CFIA and US FDA. What will be covered is our ability to share with each other the output of our oversight activities, and as a result of that, not have to duplicate those oversight activities for the same product on both sides of the border. Keith? And if you could identify yourself, I didn't ask Rory to do that because folks heard his introduction earlier today. No, I'll start with Keith here because he got the microphone first, then I'll come to you. But I would ask that you identify yourself.
Keith Musser, IE Canada, Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters. I find this really interesting and quite exciting, actually, that we're doing this this process, and hopefully the outcome of it will be very favorable and there will be a recognition. Paul, as you were aware, and many of the room, one of the areas that we are keenly interested is in the new regulatory development that's happening both here in Canada and in the United States, and within that a specific area called non-resident importers. And it's an area that, as I listened to the presentation, it struck me that maybe that will be an opportunity that will allow us to continue to allow non-residents to import product from Canada into the United States, but also from the United States into Canada. Into Canada. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll certainly react, and you'll recall when the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa hosted an event organized by the Chamber of Commerce around RCC, and Mac Lumpkin from FDA and I sat on a panel. This issue of non-resident importers is very real, and they are issues in the legislative framework in the U.S. that address that. There are issues in the Canadian proposal for import regulations that address that. But we heard loud and clear that the limitations that those presented as it related to non-resident importers in the Canada-US context were particularly problematic. And so we committed to exploring the scope of what's possible. And we're doing that. So it's much too early in that exploration to tell you that we have an end game. But what I can say is this very context that you raised, the opportunity that the completion of a systems recognition approach would present, is one of the things that we believe might be a contributor to option identification in going forward. I can't be more specific than that because it's much too early to tell. But whatever approach that we end up with has to meet our obligations, not only in terms of our food safety protective interest, and that will always be our first priority, but we do have obligations under the WTO agreement. And so whatever framework that's defined will have to fit within that in terms of eligibility. And one opportunity that systems recognition presents is it establishes a very clear framework on the basis of which we get the food safety protection before we even start contemplating the potential that non-resident importers could be resident in a jurisdiction where we would not be satisfied that controls exercised upon them would be acceptable. And so we're in the really early days of thinking about this, but this does give us some potential to explore within that. The gentleman with the microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Lowell Randall. I'm with the Global Cold Chain Alliance. We actually have members on both sides of the border. My question, it's been touched on a little bit, but the two major pieces of legislation that your agencies are currently implementing, the Food Safety Modernization Act and the Safe Food for Canada Act, talk a little, if you might, a little bit about some of the, not just the opportunities that those pieces of legislation offer for more coordination, but maybe some of the challenges as well. I know that some of these regulations have not been even proposed yet in the rulemaking process, so these can take years to develop, and how does that impact your ability to move this agenda forward on the timeline that you might want to?
So on the Canadian side, you're correct. We are currently involved in quite an ambitious action plan to implement our Safe Food for Canadians Act, which was passed recently by Canadian Parliament. And at the moment, we see this as a very good opportunity to make those movements now within our legislation and the regulatory framework underneath it, so that we are lockstep with the proposed rules that are coming out by the FDA. We have been very fortunate over the last year to be able to actually be part of the work that was undertaken by the FDA. We participated in quite a bit of their work, and we've now reciprocated that in having FDA officials be part of our exploratory work as well. So at the moment, we see this as being an opportunity. Challenges, yes, it's going to be ambitious, and it will take some time, but the CFIA has made a commitment to put forward sort of the first round of proposals in the spring of next year. And we feel that we need to take the time, because we currently have over 900 various regulations that need to be reviewed and analyzed in order to fit under the new framework and the authorities that we've been provided by Parliament. So we're remaining optimistic at this point that there won't be any significant hurdles, and that the timing in terms of the work with the United States is very opportune.
Do you want to add, Jim?
Sure. I'll add that much of the work that FDA has done on systems recognition actually predated FSMA. And so this work originated in the dark ages, before FSMA. And we did have a number of conversations with CFIA as we've moved forward to discuss, obviously many of our proposed rules haven't published yet. Canada is also going through many changes with their food safety modernization. But this systems recognition arrangement will be drafted as a living document. So we didn't want to put off this work that will be so beneficial to both agencies while we wait for our proposed rules and final rules to publish. Once those rules are published, of course, we'll be sharing information under this new partnership and continue to move ahead together. So.
And if I can add, we certainly don't see systems recognition as a one and done, because it won't work. There will always be evolution in the regulatory system. God, I hope so, because it needs to continually challenge itself to get better. And so that means that important to all of this is the framework context that Tammy spoke to in terms of managing and maintaining it. And so I see that after the work with FSMA, with the Safe Food for Canadians Action Plan, just like we would with other evolution, we'll have to confirm and adjust if necessary as part of systems recognition, as part of the maintenance of systems recognition, because that's critical in order for it to be real. I don't think any of our citizens would buy in if we said, well, we've recognized and we never have to maintain that due diligence of continual assessment and verification. And so I think it's part of a dynamic system that we recognize, and that's why it's so crucial that it be supported by an effective maintenance mechanism that's really about supporting the partnership as opposed to simply signing off on an arrangement.
Hi, Mark Faduka of VLM Foods. I'm curious, just to sort of segue from the gentleman from the cold chain industry. Given that both FSMA and the Safe Food for Canadians Act, in concert with inspection modernization and importer licensing of FRS products, et cetera, that combined these represent the most sweeping updates to food safety regulations for our two countries over the past several decades, it stands to reason that there are going to be a lot of unintended consequences. There are a lot of issues within both FSMA and what we're doing in Canada that aren't necessarily aimed at our two countries, but which will have profound impacts to how supply chains will function. And many of the particularities in there may not actually be aimed, the unintended consequences may actually do precious little towards improving food safety outcomes. Case in point, the NRI issue, which we don't need to belabor in any further, but there are other issues like that. So my commenting question then is, I wonder within what you folks are doing, if there's not an opportunity to look specifically for the irritants that will result from FSMA and from SFCA, and have that as almost an area to mine for data or information from stakeholders specifically, because there will be a whole host of these things, and they're not related necessarily to changes in preventive controls. They deal with new costs that are unintended. We see the specter of significant costs being added to Canadian foodstuffs owing to agency requirements here in the United States. So I think there's a lot that's going to have yet to be seen, and I hope that there's an avenue through your panel that we can contribute as industry to how we can avoid those irritants before they become irritants.
Well, I think you point to one of the really important opportunities that stakeholders have in these processes, because the rulemaking under FSMA, the regulatory development work under Safe Food for Canadians Action Plan, both envision significant stakeholder engagement as part of the process. And I think it's critical that we not make the mistake of regulators thinking that we understand it all and that we'll see it all. Because really stakeholders play a very critical role in reminding us of some of those unintended consequences that might emerge through the proposals that come forward, so that we can put them on the table early, we can explore them together, and as a result avoid the creation of irritants even before we get to the end game. That's certainly our aim from the discussions with our colleagues. That's FDA's aim. And so, you've heard me say it before in earlier panels, but I really encourage stakeholders to take a very active part in the development process. And we've certainly envisioned that the building is going to be on the basis of engagement.
And in terms of the FSMA rules, FDA recognizes one-size-fits-all is not appropriate. We're intending to have a risk-based implementation of all of these rules. And systems recognition fits into that, that suite of information that we'll be using as we implement the rules. But I'll reiterate also that we are very eager to receive comments on each of the proposed rules as they publish.
Tony Corbo from Food and Water Watch. Would like to ask the FDA staff, as you know, on the USDA side, you have an equivalency process as part of the regulatory system. There's an opportunity for public comment before the country is added to the appropriate list in their Code of Federal Regulations as far as exporting meat products to the United States. So it's a fairly transparent process. Is there an opportunity through your systems approach, which the USDA model is a systems approach as well, for the public to comment before the systems recognition is approved?
Thanks for that question. There are some similarities between FDA systems recognition approach and FSIS's equivalence approach. And we did have a lot of communication with FSIS as we developed the process and got a lot of good advice from them. However, a big difference is that in order to ship FSIS-regulated products to the U.S., you have to have equivalence. So it's really a market access issue. For FDA-regulated products, of course, everyone knows, companies are free to ship their product to the U.S. It's not, we don't have to give approval to a firm to ship FDA-regulated products. So that's somewhat of a technicality, but it's a big difference in the two systems. We don't intend to go through notice and comment. For those who have read about our New Zealand arrangement, that was a government-to-government activity, and the arrangement really is about regulatory partnerships. So we see it as FDA and the Foreign Regulatory Agency undertake these assessments, make the determination, and foster our regulatory partnership as a government-to-government activity, not through public comment.
Hi, I'm Jim Baer, North American Millers Association. We represent wheat, corn, and oat millers on both sides of the border. And my question is, because of the stark differences in the underlying statutes in both countries, the Canadian Act, for example, doesn't contemplate flexibility for minute quantities of naturally occurring mycotoxins, for example. So given that the differences in the two statutes are so stark, what are the prospects for progress in your efforts, and doesn't that present a major hurdle to really any significant progress?
Well, you may be reacting to existing statutes as opposed to the Safe Food for Canadians Act, which is the new single statute that replaces all of the previous commodity statutes. And as noted, the opportunity that exists as the regulatory framework is developed under that statute, and as FSMA and the proposed rules under FSMA are brought in, is for that early conversation to pursue alignment, to be able to identify those types of issues, to work through on the basis of the science what is appropriate from a risk management perspective, with the ultimate aim, to the extent possible and reasonable, to achieve that alignment. Now, there will still be potentially areas where it is not possible, and we've shown that can work. We've got some carve-outs in our organic agreement as an example, where we've recognized that a different strategy has been employed, and so you recognize it, you characterize why it's there, and then you continue to operate still with the sharing of information, but you don't put the entire process aside. And so on the specific issue, I can't tell you what the outcome is going to be, but the mechanism provides a basis for having that very conversation. And the fact that we both have a new piece of legislation, so at the statute level, which has a tremendous amount of alignment at the statute level, we now have the opportunity at the regulatory level to pursue that alignment that previous statutes have enshrined, to relook.
Sure, and I'll just add that the systems recognition approach does not get down to the specifics of contaminant maximum levels, pesticide maximum residue levels, with the understanding that if we included all of those very specific standards, there would be no such thing as systems recognition, because no two countries have MRLs that completely line up and maximum levels that completely line up. The approach really is looking at how the food safety system is implemented, and do we have confidence in that system to produce safe food.
Okay, now I'm going to suggest we stop there just in the interest of time. I would invite you to join me in thanking Tammy and Julie and Seema for their presentations and the active engagement, and we are going to move on momentarily to the next panel. So thank you. Our next item is mutual reliance on food safety testing.
Now, why would that be the first? I don't know. We likely...
Sorry, we haven't met.
Tim McGrath.
Pleasure, Tim.
Tim and me are going to present.
Okay. Oh, you guys got the presentation? Perfect. Okay, we're going to dive right in to the item on mutual reliance on food safety testing. To introduce my colleagues here on the panel, to my immediate left from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Colleen Pequineau. Next to her, Tim McGrath, and next to Tim, whom many of you in the room will recognize, Lou Valdez. And
let me just say, I'm sorry to be late, but we have 6 groups, and so we did the medical products, and there's a little bit of overlap, so I apologize for being late.
No, and that's quite all right. So any of the tough questions that you wanted to ask her earlier, you have her now. And so Colleen is going to start the presentation and then hand off to Tim.
So thank you.
Okay, and
Oh, okay.
this button that advances it. No, yep, you're good.
Okay. Yeah. So, like everyone else, I'm going to give you a brief overview and a progress update and next step on this initiative. So, the objective of the initiative was to facilitate the cross-utilization of laboratory results in both countries while maintaining safety and reliance of results. So this initiative applied to food under the mandate of CFIA, Health Canada, and US FDA, which means meat is not included. So the outcome for this initiative is basically to develop a jointly acceptable process with a view to ensuring that testing conducted in one country is acceptable in the other. So the first piece which is tackled in this initiative is actually the accreditation of laboratory. It's clearly a foundational piece and it's not an end by itself. So in the work plan we had actually 2 action items. The first one was to develop and implement guiding principles for mutual acceptance of laboratory accreditation. So currently the first thing we did was to develop a list of tools that both countries use, and then we compiled those lists and recently completed a gap analysis. The good news is that many things are common. For example, we both recognize ILAC signatories, we use codex document and a number of things like that. There is a few differences which are not by themselves an issue. We each have our internal documents which are not the same but not going against each other. And we have a couple of gaps. The main one being that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has agreement with the Canadian accrediting bodies, the Standard Council of Canada and the Canadian Association for Laboratory Accreditation, which means we keep a certain oversight on the accreditation of laboratories in Canada, and the US FDA doesn't have a similar system. Another potential gap, which is not a gap yet, but we have to prevent it from happening, is that with the FISMA, the US FDA will be building an inventory of accredited laboratory and accrediting bodies. We don't have such a system in Canada, so potentially we could have a gap there. And I'm going to turn it to Tim.
Thank you. So our second action item of the two, and you've heard some discussions of this already and the way that it impacts on kind of extending and going forward with some of the things we're trying to do, is the establishment of a permanent mechanism to maintain this mutual acceptance. We've got a couple options that we're looking at. They're not different in what they do, they're just different in maybe who might do them, what permanent mechanism we might utilize. But we're definitely interested in pushing forward this permanent mechanism for some of the reasons you've already heard. Obviously, both countries have different regulations that are going to be coming into play that could bear on some of the mutual acceptance, some of the issues that we're speaking of, certainly such things as lab accreditation. So it's going to be very critical to continue this permanent mechanism to make sure that, as we've heard here, that it's an evolving process. It's not static. It's going to be very critical. And as Corinne pointed out, lab accreditation isn't the be-all, end-all. There are going to be other steps, other elements of laboratories that are going to be needed to be added to this to make that mutual acceptance really a solid piece of mechanism moving forward. So the permanent mechanism is going to be very critical, and we're looking forward to seeing how that plays out. So over the next 3 months, we definitely are looking to move forward on some of the good work that we've been able to do so far. I think that what's been really great for me is working with my Canadian counterparts. We're on the same path. We have no real derivations from the direction we're heading, which has been very refreshing. We need to work to make sure that we continue the existing mechanisms and ensure that the mechanisms do what we want them to do. We also recognize that there's a need to work on some very specific elements that we're going to hear from you all, the stakeholders. As you see what we've got, our permanent mechanism, our guiding principles, some of those things, as our stakeholders work through those, you're going to come to us and you're going to help us drive where we go in the next 3 months, how this living document progresses so that it can fulfill the needs that we're all hoping that it's going to be able to reach out to and to satisfy. It's going to be very critical to get continuing input to move forward. We look at the next steps and key issues in terms of where laboratory accreditation is going to go. Clearly, as I just said, soliciting the feedback from the stakeholders for the gap analysis and for other things like that. In some ways, I balk at the term gap analysis because I think, as we've heard, it's not really, it's more a cohesion, a unifying document rather than pointing out the gaps. There are some differences in the way we might do business, but I think, to me, the term gap is almost a negative. But you'll see it as you look through the document. There are some areas where we're not perfectly lined up. Hopefully, input from you all is going to help to guide that and push it even closer together. Obviously, the permanent mechanism, as we've discussed, is critical. Guiding principles, to push those out and to hear input from you will be very critical. So I think that hopefully we've made some good initial starts in terms of where we're going. Now it's time to hear back from you. We look forward to that, to move it forward. And I think with that, it's other input and questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you. And anything, Lou, or do we dive right into questions?
No, please.
Well, so we're in your hands. We invite your questions and comments.
Anyone?
Keith Maserati, Canada. I'm curious about this difference when it comes to accreditation, and maybe I'm not understanding this, and so this is why I'm going to ask the question. Through the Standards Council of Canada, we have a system where we do laboratory accreditation. Is that part of the comparison that you did, or is there something more that you're looking at, and Standards Council of Canada and that process doesn't kind of meet what we're striving to achieve?
Maybe I can explain a little bit the Canadian system in this area. You're right, it's the Standard Council of Canada who accredit laboratory in Canada, and also we have an agreement with them. And as of last year, we also have an agreement with another accrediting body, which is the CALA, Canadian Association for Laboratory Accreditation. So the difference basically is that in the US, you have also accreditation bodies such as A2LA and others. But the US FDA doesn't have agreement with them. The type of agreement CFIA has with these accrediting bodies is that basically we ask for some additional criteria. I mean, the laboratory in Canada will want to get to be accredited by those accrediting body in order to do regulatory business with the CFIA must meet a few more criteria in addition to what the accrediting body actually asks. Okay? There is this part, and there is also another, which is that CFIA actually provide the technical assessors who are doing the audit for those laboratories to be accredited or maintain their accreditation. SCC and CALA provide the team leaders, and the CFIA provide the technical expert, the technical assessor in the area of microbiology, chemistry, or whatever is relevant. So in a way, CFIA, also not being in the business of accrediting a laboratory, has a certain oversight on the accreditation process in Canada. That's the difference we have.
Anything further? So again here, it would be my view that we've made tremendous progress. It represents a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate the appropriate due diligence that really underpins the previous panel that we discussed, because in order to provide assurance to each other, the confidence in the data upon which each relies is an important element that laboratory accreditation provides. And so these pieces link together in setting the framework against which, rather than duplicating, we instead rely on each other tremendously. And so it represents, in my view, a tremendous opportunity, and I'm delighted with the progress that we've made. I would agree with Tim that rather than characterize the issues that remain as gaps, they're simply that. They're just issues that we're continuing to work our way through, because the opportunity far outweighs the nature of the issues themselves. I don't know if in concluding, Lou and Tim, if you have final comments.
No, we appreciate the opportunity to be here. We look forward to the feedback from the stakeholders to move us forward, to make sure that we continue the progress I think that we've already achieved, and we look forward to making more of that.
I would just say I think this particular work group is so important, because laboratory accreditation, which is so imperative, is not something that either we well understand or really gets kind of rises to a priority within a more global context. And so for that reason alone, having a kind of a spotlight and an area of focus on lab results and lab accreditation is really important from a public health perspective. So for that reason, we're really pleased.
Yeah, and I think much of the credit goes to Corinne and Tim and their teams in terms of just the level of collaboration that's happening in terms of the work and moving this forward. And I'd invite you to join me in congratulating them on the progress to date. So with that, we're turning over to, on the CFIA side anyway, our colleagues in Health Canada, our FDA colleagues continue to be on the hot seat as we shift now to veterinary drugs.
Oh, I see him. Oh, yeah, that's probably... You introduce Okay. Oh, I can do both.
Hey?
Yeah, I'll do both.
I saw that momentary look of
Did you?
worry.
You know, he's like...
Where's the...
So, let me introduce our esteemed panel. I'll start by saying I have to come to the RCC to see Steve Vaughn from our Center for Veterinary Medical Products. So I haven't seen him in quite a while, but so it's nice to have him here. Steve does come from our Center for Vet Med Products. And again, I have to just say, both Danielle and Steve, we're just incredibly lucky to have what is
You as the moderator.
a good, no, such a recognized level of expertise and people that are well known, I would say, within the global context. So thank you both for agreeing to help lead this. But Danielle Chaput and Steve Vaughn, Daniel is from our Health Canada Health Products and Food Branch. And again, we have our leads, and without further ado, I'll let them take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. What's the one on the side? Okay. Oh, it works. Great. So I guess Steve and I have basically we're going to do a tag team for this short deck. We've tossed a coin, and I get to start. Always a pleasure for me, I must say, to talk about this RCC initiative at any opportunity I have. So it's great for us, I guess, to be here today. I'll skip the first slide. I guess you've seen it a few times already, and get into the content. So the goal, very simple: simultaneous access to products with aligned MRL wherever possible, on the basis of synchronized application of the same data set. So as you can see from this goal, it's a team approach between, yes, the regulator, but also regulatees or the manufacturers in this case. So in terms of I guess there's three key activities related to this initiative. First one is pilot project. The second one is the creation of an ongoing mechanism to basically sustain this process over time. And the third one is the basically scientific collaboration for the development of aligned food safety standards. And we'll go through each of these in a bit more details. So simultaneous review pilot projects. When we started, at first I must say that this pilot project, could be done really on the basis of all of the harmonization work that has been done through the years in terms of harmonizing data requirements between the FDA and ourselves. And also, very importantly, it's also, I guess, a result of the great working relationship between our two groups. This helps a lot. This is also very important, I think. So we decided, as we got into this RCC initiative, to take a very action-oriented and pragmatic approach. So we'll say, well, we're going to test drive this. We're going to see if we can, explore if that's possible, despite some of the differences we may have in processes. So let's try this out, which is what we've done by selecting a pilot project. And we had our first, I guess, simultaneous approval last December of companion animal drugs. Again, companion animal drugs, always the same type of approach of exploring with something that may be a bit simpler, if you will. It's a less complex submission, but always with the aim of building on that foundation to go with more complex submission. And as a matter of fact, we now have 3 pilots in the works, which are for food-producing animals, basically. So again, building on the success on the first one. And we're still working with manufacturers, basically, on identifying potential additional pilots. So Steve and I have been attending a number of industry meetings and many venues, basically sending the word out saying that we're kind of open for business. We're open to get these pilots in, and we must say, I think that initially there was a bit of, I would say, LP skepticism, which I think is good, but after some discussion, we finally got our first one, and I think now our goal was really to showcase that this was possible, and now it's basically picking up from there. Action 2 is developing a criteria-based ongoing mechanism for collaborative reviews. Of course, I mean, pilots are pilots, but then you have to make that sustainable, I guess, in the long term, and have, a predictable and transparent process to make this happen. It's really what this ongoing mechanism is about. The pilot was really about, learning. It was a learning experience, and for us, there were things as basic, for example, as the terminology. What we call a submission in Health Canada is not the same as a submission FDA. So, of course, that resulted in some miscommunication early on. That's life. We also found out that the Canadian arm of a manufacturer and the U.S. arm may not always be aligned. We found that out by, for example, in our first pilot, not having the same data set. So we would get the conference call with various reviewers, but they were talking from two different song sheets. So that you can imagine what this does. So learning, well, that's what it was. And when we say building ongoing mechanism, well, based on these learning, now we've basically put a step in the process, which is once we have a candidate for pilot reviews, we send a joint Health Canada FDA letter to the applicant saying, this is how it works, we expect the same data set, we want commitment of marketing at the same time in both countries, because keep in mind the goal is not simultaneous approval, it's access. So once it's approved, then marketing is the next thing, So these are all some of the learnings that we've gone through in the last one. So it was a very useful exercise, I must admit. So based on this, we're starting to develop this ongoing mechanism. And on this, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Steve.
Okay. Thank you, Danielle. And as Danielle said, it's been a very successful process, and it's been fun. We've been working together for a number of years, even before the RCC started, and so this just made us visit each other a little bit more, but we continue to work, and it's been a very good process, and we've been able to share resources and expertise and be able to grow from that. So let's see, there we go. So the third action that we have been doing is a collaboration in establishing comparable safety standards in terms of MRLs and tolerances for veterinary drug residues in food. And so our experts have gotten together on a number of occasions, and at one point, it was a couple weeks, they actually spent time together and really rolling up their sleeves and looking at how we go about calculating MRLs and tolerances and where there may be differences. And we're very, very close together. In fact, if you look at, we've compared the MRLs and tolerances between Canada and the United States, and the vast majority of them are identical. There's just a few minor differences, and really the differences are those that have occurred because there were probably different data sets over different points in time, different analytical methods being used, and very minor, no order of magnitude kind of differences that we're concerned about. Now, of course, there are some where we have an MRL where a drug is approved in one country and not the other, but outside of that, we're already very, very close in alignment, and that's a very positive outcome. So with that, then some of the work that we've been doing is actually talking to our stakeholders, both in the U.S. and in Canada, and whenever possible, we have tried to do that jointly. Obviously, budget restrictions sometimes limit us, but we always try to include our counterparts in those discussions, and I think that's important because there are different drivers and different pressures and budget issues between our two agencies, and so that there are different factors that come into play in what we can do and how we can approach it. And that's really what we have a lot of our discussion about. Danielle and I talk at length about ways that we can work together within the confines of our budget authorities and so on. So, and then talking with our stakeholders in a number of different venues, we also are learning what are really the issues. And one of the things, for example, that we have discovered is that some of the concerns relative to alignment of veterinary drugs really doesn't have anything to do at all with the regulatory process. It has to do with the available market. Is there a big enough market for some of the commodities to be able to get into one country or the other, and different disease indications and so on. So there are a number of other factors that are outside of our process. But to the extent that we can potentially encourage sponsors by offering them an opportunity for a simultaneous review and simultaneous market access, that's really our goal in all of this. So I'm sure we're going to get the question about what are the next steps, and we're looking at a number of different ways that we can formalize our simultaneous review process. We're looking at ways that we can actually start leveraging resources and using each other's expertise and to try to find ways that we may not need to duplicate work. And that's something that we've been working at for some time now, actually, before RCC. And so one of the obligations that we have under this phase one is also to take the lessons learned out of these pilots and build it into systematic collaborative reviews, and that's certainly something that we are doing as we speak, and we're looking forward to, in the not too distant future, having another simultaneous approval coming forward. So that's all looking very good. And then the other part of this is that we continue to touch base with our stakeholders, because we're also learning about the challenges that the third partner in this, the animal health companies, have in this, as far as being able to work across their international boundaries in different divisions of their companies, and they have some of the same challenges that we have between the two regulatory agencies in being able to coordinate submissions and have equal priority, for example, for development of drugs and so on. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. So thank you. Luke, it's good to see you again.
Good. So questions, please.
Sean Parker, Fiber Animal Health. I think the simultaneous review program is an excellent program. I guess my question is, does the simultaneous review program only apply to new drug submissions or other types of submissions? That's the first question. And also, will Health Canada collaborate with CVM in terms of requirements? Because I'm finding that in some cases, Health Canada has more requirements than CVM in some cases. And how's that going to be handled? Will VDD be willing to work with CVM and industry to saying that we're not going to ask for, those additional requirements, or we're still going to have to meet those requirements?
Well, I guess on your first question, the focus for now is on new drug submission, but I guess we'll see where that takes us. In terms of the requirements, I mean, there's an ongoing effort to align our requirements as much as possible. There might be cases here and there where there are exceptions to this, but I think this needs to be discussed case by case. But the overall principle is to align requirements, or unless there's any good scientific or geographical reason or whatever to have the different requirements. Yeah.
I guess it's my turn.
Yes, sir.
I heard that there might be difference between the way submission is defined in Canada versus the way it's defined in the U.S. And I guess that leads to the question I had, is that mechanistically, how do you handle the differences? As you know, Steve, you've been phasing application review for many, many years, and I don't think that's probably what's done in VDD. So how do you mechanistically handle that conflict between the phased review process that you have and probably the more traditional process that VDD might have?
Well, of course, thanks, Rich, for pointing that out. That certainly was one of the early things that we had to overcome to be able to do simultaneous review. And let me just give a little background. In the United States, it's about 1988 or 89, we've had a phased review process. And what we do in that case is, rather than wait until the full application has been completed and then is submitted, we work with the pharmaceutical companies to work on the different parts of those applications under the investigational phase. And we break those down into building blocks we call technical sections. So for example, target animal safety, effectiveness, human food safety, chemistry and manufacturing controls, environmental safety, and so on. And we'll work on those independently and simultaneously. And as a sponsor finishes a technical section, we give them a technical section complete letter, and when they have their full deck of letters, then they submit their administrative NEDA, and 60 days later they have their approval. That's very different than doing all the work, not having any feedback until the application comes in, and then having a fairly lengthy review of the application and then a response. So that was the first thing we had to work out. So what we have done is we've actually put a lot of pressure on my dear friend here to pull the processes out of the queue, if you will, in those cases where we've had those submissions. And what we're doing in the pilot is we're doing simultaneous review of data sets within a technical section. And we're trying to do the different technical sections because they each present their own challenges. And through that, we're learning how we might be able to adapt processes to be able to line up as far as timelines. The other thing that is a confounder on here that has also been a challenge for us is, you know, we have performance timelines that we have to meet for user fee goals for very specific types of submissions. And submissions may be a data set, may be a protocol, and we have actually about 65 different kinds of submissions as opposed to an NAD application. And so getting the terminology aligned was the first challenge. But the processes are also lining up and as we're working with this. And I will say that you know, so far we've had somewhat limited interest. I think it's growing from sponsors to participate in the simultaneous review process. So far we've been able to accommodate everybody and move forward. Actually, it has accelerated the timelines for some of these approvals in both countries.
Going. Any questions? Further? Comments? Ideas?
Well, thank you all very much again for the opportunity to talk about this initiative, and thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Lou.
The next item on the agenda for Agri-Food 2 is meat cut nomenclature. Just want to have a quick check whether the folks responsible for presenting are here and ready, because we are a few minutes ahead of schedule. Folks, if you'd like to take a short break, I think there's still water and coffee behind you through the back doors there. We'll reconvene in a few minutes.
Thank you.